On September 17, 2006, Fourpeaked Mountain in Alaska erupts, marking the first eruption for the long-dormant volcano in at least 10,000 years. Also, an audio tape of a private speech by Hungarian Prime Minister Ferenc Gyurcsány is leaked to the public, in which he confessed that his Hungarian Socialist Party had lied to win the 2006 election, sparking widespread protest across the country. But in the evening on this date, in a small, unincorporated community of Riverside County, 3 people lost their lives to what looked at first to be a fire of accidental nature. But upon further investigation, we see a horrendous triple homicide that would not have full closure until 12 years later. Thank you for joining us in tonight's episode of California True Crime as we discuss the Pinyon Pine Murders. Hello and welcome everyone. This is Sean, who will be hosting tonight, and as always, I have beautiful Charles and Jessica with me. How are you guys tonight?
Good.
Excellent.
Great. This is a case that has become more well-known in recent, but this is not one that we had heard too much of before it started. I found it thinking of how the desert is weird, so I thought I would read more about it. You guys heard about it before it got popular, or not popular, but I mean more in the news?
No, I hadn't heard about it, but once you brought it up and then started to look around, and I think it's the first case we've covered on the show that is going on kind of while we're in the process.
Right.
So once you kind of realize that, then you start looking around and a lot of stuff comes up, news stories, and then the 48-hour episode.
Yeah, that 48-hour episode, I didn't know that it was before, but I had never really heard of it before, but I guess I don't really watch a lot of those shows. They're a little too dramatic.
I don't know that it's the guilty pleasure. I think if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are somewhat like me, and I can kind of go at stretches and watch one after the other.
Yeah.
I'm a Dateline person, I'll confess, over 48 hours.
Well, I mean, I watched every single episode of CSI Miami, and that was really hard in my life, but
not the regular CSI?
No, I never watched any episodes of that.
Just Miami.
I just wanted to watch the guy take his sunglasses off over and
David
over.
Caruso?
Yeah. I'd also like to thank Brian, who is one of our Patreon subscribers. Thanks again, and may all your dreams come true and everything. And thanks, Brian. So on the evening of September 17th, 2006, a 911 call came in saying that the Friedley family home was on fire in a remote area of Pinyon Pines. The call came in from a neighbor who went to the house after he saw glow coming from that direction. Now, who lived in the house at the time was Vicki Friedley, 53, her boyfriend John Hayward, who was 55, and Vicki's youngest daughter, Rebecca Friedley, who was 18. Most of her friends and family called her Becky, so that's what we will refer to her. The firefighters were able to get the fire out, but pretty much the whole house burned to the ground. From the pictures, it looked like the garage was halfway still standing. At first, thoughts were from one of Vicki's daughters that it seemed like it was an accident, and she said on the episode of 48 Hours that maybe her mom fell asleep with a lit cigarette. But that would soon change when they found the burnt remains of Becky outside in the back of the house inside a wheelbarrow. Before we go any farther into the crime and the investigation, I would like to talk about the area first. If you do not know the area of Pinyon Pines, it's located in the desert 40 minutes south of Palm Springs. It's considered part of Coachella Valley, which has some pretty interesting history. This whole area of Palm Springs, Palm Desert, Cathedral City, and more, it seems to be like a vacation retirement kind of place. My friends and I try to go there once a year, like for a boys' weekend, to gamble, eat tons of food, do avocado masks, and watch city council meetings on TV because, I mean, that's what you guys do on vacation, correct?
Definitely.
Yeah, almost assuredly.
Every single time.
Yeah, I thought we were pretty boring.
When you say gamble, is it like legal gambling in California is kind of...
There's a lot of Indian casinos all kind of bunch together. There's Agua Caliente we like to go to, and there's a bunch there that are in driving distance of like 20, 25 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And a weird fun fact, legal Indian gaming in California first sort of became a thing when California tried to stop casinos in this Palm Beach area, and a legal decision made it legal, and they passed a law on this whole thing. So that all exists because of the ones that you go to.
Yeah. Also, when we try to leave for Boys Weekend, we're leaving from Los Angeles, and I don't know if it's just horrible luck, but we're always stuck in this huge traffic, and it takes so much time, hours more than it should. If there's no traffic, it's usually only 2 hours to get there from Los Angeles. Also, on the way, you can stop at the dinosaurs that were featured in both Pee-wee's Big Adventure and The Wizard, starring Fred Savage. This area is really beautiful with all the mountain ranges that are around. I also did not know that there were so many different ranges that had different names. You have the San Jacinto Mountains, the Santa Rosa Mountains, the Little San Bernardino Mountains, and probably my favorite are the Chocolate Mountains. I have no clue which ones those are. It just has a rad name. The Coachella Valley shows a population of around 345,000 with all the cities put together in 2010, but it might already be up to 500,000 as of now. Also, right in this area, before you get into Palm Springs from the west, you'll drive through the San Gorgonio Pass Wind Farm. This, for us in Northern California, is like the Altamont, and the San Gorgonio Pass has 3,218 windmills producing energy. And this is also considered the windiest place in California. Also, a fun fact for you, Jessica, is that the San Gorgonio was featured on Huell Hauser's California Gold in 1998.
Nice.
So, like I said, it was a vacation place with celebrities like Frank Sinatra coming here, but in the 80s and 90s, there was a boom of just families moving in because of the low cost of housing and all the apartments for rent. There's also another weird celebrity story I would like to bring up from one of the greatest crooners of all time, Bing Crosby. So when I mention that name, I'm just going to assume that nowhere in your brain do you associate him with a mobile home park, correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, in 1955, he and some others just did that and opened the Blue Skies Village in Rancho Mirage, which is right there by Palm Springs. Now, it has become a mobile home gated community, so it's kind of a fancy mobile home park. I looked at some of the pictures of the homes, and they're all kind of unique and pretty cool looking. I also found one on Zillow that was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath that has an estimated value of $225,000 just for a mobile home.
2 bedrooms and one. That seems exorbitant.
I know, but I might just be like just living in this historical mobile home park. I don't know.
I don't know.
So just to give you an idea of what Pinyon Pines is like, Sean said it was 45 minutes away from the Palm Springs area, and you have to go through a lot of desert where there's just sort of nothing but maybe ranches and a few other things out there. When you get there, Pinyon Pines itself is an unincorporated area, which means that it's actually not a city. The median household income in this specific area is $56,592, and it was really hard to find population, but most set it at somewhere less than 100, so there's not that many people out there. And this place, Pinyon Pines, is actually named after a tree found in California's desert mountain area. That's called Pinus edulis, and I guess it means edible. These are kind of little pine trees that you see all over the desert. They, instead of growing tall, they grow out, so they almost look like bushes. And my understanding is that every part of the tree is edible, so Native Americans would use the needles for tea. Pine nuts, I believe, come from this tree, and even the bark is edible, and they're just sort of everywhere in this area.
Riverside County is also the 4th largest county in California, right behind LA, San Diego, Orange, and then it's Riverside. It's home to Joshua Tree National Park, Palm Springs, Salton Sea. The other thing that I kind of find interesting about Riverside County is that it is a county that spans the east and west of California. Actually, it's like a rectangle, stretches from one border all the way across to the other border. So we'll probably come back to Riverside County a lot in the future because it is such a big geographic area, and there's a lot of these pocket communities and unincorporated areas where a lot of stuff happens.
So now back to the night on September 17th, 2006. I talked about how the firefighters were able to get the fire out pretty much, but the whole house burned. That was because it was hard for them to find the place since it was in such a remote part of the desert. There were so many roads that looped around or went back and forth, dirt roads that were messed up from weather. It was pretty much a huge maze to get out there to them. After a while, they pretty much just had to follow the glow once they found it. Now, inside the parameters of what should be the house is where they found both Vicky and John. After investigation and an autopsy, it was determined that both were shot to death and did not die by fire or fire-related deaths such as smoke inhalation. It was said that Vicky was shot with a .40 caliber handgun. I'm not much of a gun person, so I looked it up of what .40 caliber means, and it's the approximate internal diameter of the gun barrel, or the diameter of the projectiles it shoots. So with a .40 caliber, it means that the barrel diameter is roughly 0.4 inches. Though her body was severely burned, pathologists were able to find a bullet entrance wound to the right side of her head, and part of the bullet stuck in the left side. Now, John Hayward was shot twice with a shotgun. According to the Riverside County Chief Pathologist Mark Fajardo, shotgun pellets have diffused into the chest cavity, few reaching Hayward's heart. So, Charles, we were talking about this a little bit, and you can kind of explain about shotguns and its shells.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a gun expert either, but shotgun shell, unlike a regular bullet out of a regular gun, shotgun fires. It can fire pellets or slugs, but it's encased in a plastic casing, so that when the primer goes off and it fires the gunpowder, the pellet, in this case, the pellets are shot out the end. So it's, instead of one projectile, it's a lot of little projectiles, and that will spread out. So ideally, well, I won't say ideally, but the bigger the spread, the further away from the target it is. The problem that this has is that because there's no rifling in the barrel, and these are many projectiles, that it makes ballistics almost impossible to do. So you can tell it's a shotgun, but you couldn't really necessarily tell which shotgun it was. You might be able to tell the gauge or how big the spread is from that.
So now with Becky, her body was located outside in the back of the house inside a wheelbarrow. They were not able to determine the cause of death because of the severity of thermal damage from being burned. Fajardo also said that the left side of her body was missing from the intense heat and it had burned away.
So does that mean there's no skeletal, like it's no skeletal remains, or?
I'm not really sure. That was pretty much the wording. I didn't change it. So I don't know if it said burned away. So I'm not sure if the skeletal remains were still there or not. So at first, I don't think anyone really had any good reasons why this would have happened. Everyone was just shocked. I don't think the police really had anything either, since they even kind of looked at Vicky's ex-husband, Ron Friedley, as a potential suspect, which, I mean, that's what it seems like they usually do first. The ex-husband is kind of, yeah. So, but Ron is actually a retired lieutenant of the Riverside Sheriff's Department, and he actually built the house that burnt down. Ron and Vicky's divorced after 13 years of marriage, but what I gathered from him after reading articles and watching interviews of him and what his daughter said, it didn't really seem to be that bad of a divorce, even though all divorces are probably bad. It seemed like they separated okay.
So they had other children other than Becky?
Yeah, they have there's two other daughters.
Okay.
And are they older or younger?
They're older. Becky was the youngest. They made Ron take a polygraph, and he passed easily. They were also able to use phone records to show that Ron was 11 hours away at the time of the murders at his home in Lakehead, California, which is very, very north, almost close to the border of Oregon.
It makes sense that they would look at the ex-husband. I mean, how many times have we seen, even in cases we've done here, where the person guilty, it's Occam's razor, the path of least resistance, that it's somebody dies, it's somebody connected to him that did the killing. So you have to eliminate that possibility, and who's the most likely suspect? It would be the ex-husband.
Yeah, I mean, statistically, I think you're more likely to be hurt by someone you know than a complete stranger. And I think you probably, if you arrive on scene and there's not someone there that you can arrest and it's clear who has done it, you kind of have to start with the people closest to the victims and then move out from there.
Yeah, just to at least eliminate, not to focus in, but to make sure that it was not them.
Well, and look at, a callback to an episode that we just recently aired is the San Jose Halloween murders, where the police arrive and you have somebody covered in blood who had nothing to do with it, who's trying to spend time with his wife, but they arrest him and put him in the back of just to be on the safe side.
Right.
And I mean, hindsight's 2020, but that's a terrible thing to be accused of that crime. But the police have to do what they have to do.
Yeah.
The other thing too, because we talk about unincorporated riverside, I think the thing to remember too is that they don't have a police force. This Pinyon Pines, it's unincorporated, so that's no really government other than county government. So these people that are doing the investigation are investigating a huge area of land they're responsible for. So I can see why they would not jump to conclusions, but try to go that route.
Right. So once Ron was pretty much ruled out, the police were wondering if it was some revenge killing for something Ron had done while working as a lieutenant, but he didn't really do anything that would make someone get revenge. His job on the force wouldn't have caused enemies like that. Also, how hard it was for the firefighters to get to the house. It didn't seem like it was just some random murder that someone might have stumbled upon the house, or like a case of mistaken identity. Even though it's not that far-fetched, because like the Manson family, they lived at Spawn's Ranch, went to a certain house because they thought someone else lived there, but the police didn't think this was anything like that in the case. Also, there was nothing stolen. I'm assuming they're talking about the garage, because if the house is burnt down, you can't really tell.
Yeah, if the house is that burnt and the family isn't surviving, it'd be interesting to see how they made that determination that nothing was missing from that.
Right.
Although I will say there were hiking trails all around this area.
Oh, okay.
I found like 10. And this time that you're talking about, this week, there was actually a meteor shower.
Oh, so there could have been a lot of people out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if people where they would go see that, but the desert's a good place, and if there are trails, it's possible.
And I think that's because then I wonder if people would have noticed somebody hiking around. But I mean, I guess if you live out there, I'm in my mind, I'm thinking of somebody like hiking through this trail with like gas cans and a gun. But I imagine if the gas was at the house,
right. So now they decided to switch focus, and they started looking into Becky and maybe being a target. Now, this is where the two main suspects come into the picture. We have Becky's ex-boyfriend, Robert Pape, and his best friend, Christian Smith. At this time of the murders, Pape was 18 and Christian was 17. They had been friends since high school, and there were some friends and family of Becky's that believed these were the two boys who committed this crime. Jeannie McDaniels, a friend of Becky, said on the 48-hour episode that, quote, "When her and I went on vacation about 10 months before she died, he," referencing to Pape, "called about 20-30 times in a night, just harassing her, wanting to talk to her while we were hanging out with friends. I mean, minutes within each other," end quote. Others would say that Pape was very possessive of her. They were still dating at the time of these phone calls and broke up about 2 months after this. McDaniels also went on to say, quote, "She came to my house 3 weeks before she died and said, 'He had even threatened to kill me.' Those were her exact words. 'He even threatened to kill me.' She said because he wasn't taking the breakup well and wanted her and didn't want anybody else to have her. That's what she said to me," end quote.
So Becky and Pape were dating in high school?
Yeah.
And so, okay, so that in that 10 months, that's in high school, and now it's post high school,
right?
And she's breaking up with him.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the vacation that they took when he was calling 20 to 30 times a night, her friend says that it was harassing. Is that a way she felt, or is that something, do you know, that Becky also believed?
I don't know if Becky did. I think Jeannie might have been making the assumption of 20 to 30 calls minutes after each other that it was harassing. Mm-hmm. It's more annoying than anything, but I don't know if those were Becky's words or feelings, but this was what Jeannie said.
Okay.
Also, Becky's cousin, Daniela Zormanio, called the police tip line. She told police that she spoke to Becky the night before the murders. She said that on the night before, Robert had come into Denny's where Becky worked and started harassing her. She said the harassment was so bad that he was asked to leave the restaurant. Because of this, Becky agreed to go on a hike with Robert the next night to work and talk things out. This also goes along with something another friend of Becky said. This friend name is Javier Garcia Jr. He told investigators that on the night of the murders, Becky told him she was going hiking on her property with Robert and Christian. Now, we'll come back to Javier and this part in a little bit. So, with all this information about Pape and Smith coming in, the police even kind of hinted that these two were on their radar already. But weeks, months, and years passed and nothing happened. It was seriously 6 years went by and there was still no arrests and in the murder of Vicky, John, and Becky. Even with Ron's background in law enforcement, he was getting kind of like the cold shoulder when trying to talk to anyone. He wasn't getting any information from anyone. The family was just getting very frustrated, which completely makes sense. I mean, every day it must be overwhelming, tiring. It's the same thing with nothing going on. It's got to be hard.
Especially when there's, it's one thing if you have information in there or they have suspects, it seems, and you're sitting on the sidelines, and then he worked for this group too, and then being so far removed from the event. Yeah, I can't imagine what he must be going or must have been going through.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like when it's a case and they find the person who did it and there's a trial. So people can kind of, I don't know that you ever move on, but you can kind of sort of move on. But this is just, you can never move on from it.
Yeah. And 6 years is forever when it's just like the same. You have suspects. Nothing's really changing. You're trying the whole time. It must just feel so much longer than 6 years.
So much helplessness.
Yeah. So Ron turned to his friend Luis Bolaños, who he first met when Ron was a training officer at the sheriff's department. Luis was a private detective and also worked at the DA's office for a while. Luis had been asking Ron to let him help, and I think after just so long with nothing, he finally just said fine. So the first thing that he did was put up a large billboard. So let me describe this billboard. The billboard on the top left said, "Meet Becky." Underneath, there were two pictures side by side of each other. One might be Becky's senior photo, and the other looks to be a wheelbarrow on fire with just legs hanging off the side by where the handles are. On the right side of the billboard, it reads, quote, "Does this make you sick? Then do something about it. $50,000 reward, unsolved triple murder." And then it had a hotline number. Just so you know, the picture was not real. It was a recreation.
Still, that's a stark image as you're driving down.
It was definitely shock
freeway.
value for you to stop and read, or not stop while you're driving, but I mean, really pay attention.
Right.
So it was eye-catching, I guess.
Was it just the one billboard?
That's all I know of.
And was that image used in other media? Like,
oh, the news picked up on it right away. So besides just having the one billboard, it was on like every news station and probably in the
newspapers too.
He also held a press conference on the foundation of where the house once stood. It was just now a concrete slab. He had both Becky's sisters, Tanya and Drew, with him, holding a smaller version of the billboard. And then a year goes by, nothing happens. So on the 7th anniversary of their death, Luis held another press conference at the same time. This time the sisters weren't there, but Ron and Becky's cousin Daniela were. So a few months after the second press conference, it looked like some progress was actually happening. Both Pape and Smith were subpoenaed to go before a grand jury. During the grand jury, both men pleaded the fifth and used their right not to incriminate themselves. Then in March, they were arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
Can you plead the fifth in a grand jury indictment?
So I read that you could plead the fifth. You should get a lawyer if you get called before a grand jury. And if you have a prosecutor, not a judge, is in charge of a grand jury. So if you want to plead the fifth, you need to tell the prosecutor. then they'll either get you a lawyer or your lawyer will come in. You have to tell that person, from what I understand, all of the reasons that you're pleading the fifth. And then I think somehow they go before a judge or someone decides, hears that information and says, yeah, you have a good reason. You could be legally held accountable for whatever it is if you testify. But the thing I found kind of confusing here is everything I read said that if the grand jury if you're the defendant, you shouldn't be being called before the grand jury. But these two boys were. So I'm kind of confused about that whole setup.
Yeah, I thought the grand jury was like, here's all of the evidence that the prosecution has for this case, and we'd like to go forward with it.
Was the grand jury kind of a front to get them to talk? Because maybe it didn't, they were just trying to get information, and they called them as witnesses or something?
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. I just did this research. I'm not really sure how it's supposed to work, but if you're the person they're trying to bring charges against, it said that you shouldn't be being called before the grand jury. And technically, in most cases, you wouldn't even know the grand jury is happening. They often happen in secret. And so it just seemed really weird that these two boys had to be subpoenaed, and you have to go if you get subpoenaed, and then they had to use their Fifth Amendment rights so they wouldn't have to testify. So I don't know if they were trying to bring charges maybe even against someone else, and they were using this as a way to get them to testify. I don't know. I know grand juries are often used in cases where they don't have as strong a case as they normally would. That's what I read. So I think that definitely fits the situation, but it's sort of confusing how this all worked out.
I have a question. When you said you are able to plead the fifth in a grand jury, but you have to prove that what you're holding back could incriminate you. So does that mean that if I plead the fifth, well, in this case, I do not want to answer questions about Becky because, and then I have to tell them the reason why I don't want to answer that question?
You have to tell your lawyer, and then that lawyer will tell you. And we should say that you can be called before a grand jury or just and testify anywhere, and your pleading the fifth might not have to do with the actual case. So you might not be pleading the fifth because you're guilty of murder. You might be pleading the fifth because your testimony might show that you're guilty
of something else.
In something else.
I was taking drugs on the side, and I don't want to get in trouble for taking those drugs, so I don't want to say anything. We also should say at this time, like anything else, that just because you're pleading the fifth does not make you guilty of the crime you're being arrested for. It's a constitutional right that everyone has in America, and it's sacrosanct. I think sometimes, though, when you watch TV, I know I do, when I watch TV or Law and Order and you see somebody plead the fifth, my gut reaction is, well, why aren't you just telling the truth?
Right.
You're hiding something. But when in reality, like you said, there's lots of good reasons why you wouldn't want to.
Yeah, but your lawyer can tell you if you had a good reason. My understanding is that people often get, just your everyday person who's been subpoenaed will often get very nervous, even if they haven't committed a crime or there's no reason to testify. And so they'll often want to plead the fifth to get out of it. And I also saw a lot of stuff where people claimed that grand juries were sort of dangerous because you were forced to testify. So in this case, I guess you talk to a lawyer and they say yes, then they tell a judge, and then I think the judge ultimately will decide you had a reason. And none of those people can tell the prosecutor what that reason is. That's all held from those people.
So I tell my lawyer, hey, I can't testify because I was under the influence of narcotics. My lawyer then says, yeah, what you were doing would get you in trouble. They go to the the judge and say, this is the reason why my client cannot. The judge would then hear that piece of that statement from me, and they would make the final determination.
That's how I think it works. I saw a lot of differing things, so that's kind of the thing I came up with, or ultimately decided, or not decided myself, but found out. But those things that you tell your lawyer or ultimately a judge are not told to the prosecution, so you don't have to worry about that side of finding out.
And again, like we always say, we're not experts. We're fascinated by this and try to do as much research as possible. If you're listening to this and are a lawyer that is familiar with this in California, please drop us a line at calitruecrime@gmail.com or any of our social media to let us know. We're always trying to find out more stuff and learn new things as we go and do our research.
Yeah, just be nice to us. I know we're like just giant hacks when it comes to the judicial system.
Right.
But
I will say, though, everything I read said that if you are subpoenaed before a grand jury, even if you're just a witness, you've done nothing wrong, you're not worried about it, you should seek counsel first.
I think it's a good thing in any case, right? How many times do you see something on TV and they give you that choice? You are able to be represented by a lawyer, but they don't take that opportunity.
And in California, a grand jury is really a prosecutor's. They're the lead. They present what evidence they want to. It's led all by them. They tell the story. There's not a defense put forward for people. Like I said, most of the time it happens in secret, so someone who may be a defendant wouldn't even know it's happening. So you want to be really careful if you're someone who's been subpoenaed. And if you are a defendant, the grand jury isn't finding you guilty of a crime. The jury is finding whether or not you had probable cause to being charged. So that's what the case the prosecutor is presenting, just to kind of tell the difference of the two.
Also, if you wanted to read the grand jury transcript, it is some light reading of 461 pages. We will put a link to this on our CaliforniaTrueCrime.com site.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
We are the Voice of the Victim podcast. Every Thursday, we discuss cases that have been influenced by abuse in some way and try to make sense of these senseless things.
We also try to identify the missed opportunities where people could have made a difference in the future of the victim.
We hope to help others know what to look for so we can protect ourselves and our children.
Subscribe to us on your favorite app and help us spread our message.
And remember, if you see something, say something.
We are all the voice of the victim.
So now this is already 2015. Christian Smith was married, and he was also a decorated war hero. He was part of the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. His father tells a story of Christian while serving in Afghanistan, saving a soldier's life after the man was shot through the lung. He talks about Christian pulling the man with one hand and firing at Afghani soldiers with the other. Christian has also won commendations of valor, and he has 2 Purple Hearts. 1 Purple Heart for being shot through the arm. He also took grenade shrapnel for the other he received. His wife was also pregnant at this time. Pape was also married, and he was also an active member of his church. So at this time, some information was finally coming out on what they might have on the 2 suspects, besides some of the stories that we heard earlier. What we can see is that we have phone records and pinging of cell towers, and some DNA and other circumstantial evidence that I will explain. First, let's start with what the boys said in the original police interview. When they were first questioned, they both denied being anywhere close to Becky's house and had no intentions of going on a hike with her. They said that they were going to church that night. On the way to church, they decided to call down and they learned that it was closed. So they went back to Christian's house and played video games. After that, they went to a middle school in the area and played paintball. This was their story. So one thing I wanted to talk about is the phone records of the church call. They never really ever bring up, did they make it? Did anyone answer? I mean, this did happen on a Sunday, so they could have been going to evening mass, if it's called. And I'm just wondering, did they ever look into the phone call?
You would think that would be something they would do.
Right. They just never bring it up.
Right. Especially if that's an alibi.
Yeah.
Especially with landlines. They were probably still using a landline for the church.
Well, they said they were on their way and calling.
So, I mean, they used a cell
the
phone,
church,
but the church would have a landline, right? And this is happening not in Pinyon Pines, but in another city where the boys are, Cathedral City.
Oh, yeah. That's where Pape lived at the time. And then paintball, like, they never even checked the school to see if they did paintball. And I just always, even if they used, like, clear paintballs, I think you can still tell, like, the spots that were shot, unless they were just they were like maybe doing like imaginary paintball. I don't know. So,
well, you expect a couple of guys running around with paintball guns. The whole point of it is
to shoot the
paintballs and see it splattered all over. So, especially if you're playing around a school, you know. The other thing I wonder if it's becoming more prevalent as time goes on, but security cameras. You know, a lot of schools have security footage, and it runs in some cases 24 hours a day. So there's no mention of that, or night custodians.
Right.
Schools have night custodians. I would think the church, the same thing. Even if there isn't anyone actually actively there answering the phones, do they have night cleanup crews or things like that?
With phone pingings, at 7:14 p.m., Pape's cell phone pinged off a tower at the beginning of Highway 74. This is the highway that leads towards the Friedlies' home. After this, the boys' phones were not active until 10:30 p.m. So I used maps on my phone. It takes about 24 minutes from the beginning of Highway 74, just typing in Pinyon Pines, but not the Friedlies' actual address. One thing that the defense will bring up is that Smith's phone pinged minutes before Pape's, and it was miles away, but I guess pinging can be very inaccurate.
Yeah, especially at this time in 2006 when this happened. I don't know that much about it. I do know that it's sometimes presented as something you can definitely tell where somebody is, but that in reality it's a little bit more difficult, and pings can come off of different towers for different reasons, and I don't know that it means anything or does. I don't know.
Right. Also, a while before the murders, Pape was instant messaging his wife, girlfriend at the time, about a problem she was having with an ex-boyfriend. The instant message from Pape said, quote, "Well, if you know where he lives, we can professionally burn his house down," end quote. Sounds pretty damning, but his defense lawyer said the prosecution only took one line from thousands of instant messages, and it was kind of taken out of context. So now there was also DNA found at the site. Some believe that Becky was killed in a different area than where she was found, and they found this business card back farther away from where she was found, and on this business card was the DNA. This business card had DNA profile of Christian Smith on it. The defense will say that sure, it could have had his DNA, but it proves nothing. They have no clue how long it had been there, or if Becky might had dropped it. There was also another story about the two boys who were obsessed with fire. Another one of Becky's friends, Brandon Harrison, said that the two boys lit something like a mattress on fire, but he wasn't sure if it was really a mattress. He said because of this, Becky got mad and wouldn't talk to Pape for a couple days. From what Becky's family and friends said, Becky had somewhat of a fear of fire. When she was young, about 8 years old, she had pulled a pan of hot grease onto her, which gave her third-degree burns on her chest. When they did a search of the boys' houses, in Pape's house, they found a shotgun that could be similar. They also found .40 caliber ammo and a holster for a Glock 40, but no gun. Also, Christian's dad, who was not in town the night of the murders, said that his guns that the boys could have had access to were in the trunk of the car with him. So, like what you were going back to what you said, Charles, they found a shotgun that could be similar,
right.
But it's so hard with shotguns to actually pinpoint anything.
And there was no mention of running like a ballistics test on Christian's father's Glock 40.
I don't know if he actually had a Glock 40. I mean, that was at Pape's house that they found a holster for a Glock 40, but it didn't really say what Christian's dad had in his trunk.
So there's two. So there's at Pape's house, there's ammunition and a holster, but no gun.
Right.
Christian's dad also owns a gun. Guns, but those were with him
in a car.
Somewhere else.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So So this is circumstantial, but we have a gun that possibly could be involved, and all the stuff that would go along with a gun, but the gun is mysteriously missing.
Right.
Did they follow up on that at all? I mean, is there any...
No, I don't know. I'm not sure if it comes up later or not. They also found a shoe print size 12 from a pair of Vans, and they also found a pair of Vans in one of the suspects' home. I think if you go to anyone's home, you're probably going to find a pair of Vans size 12. I have a pair of Vans size 12.
I actually don't own a pair of Vans. I've come close a few times, but again, it's like saying, I mean, mine is Chuck Taylors are my shoe of choice.
Right.
But now we're starting to get way circumstantial, like you have.
It seems that
it's a common shoe.
Right. So this seemed to be the evidence that the prosecution had brought up at the grand jury. Now, both the defense lawyers, Richard Blumenfeld for Pape and John Patrick Dolan for Smith, felt like that everything against these clients was so far-fetched and circumstantial that that the state really had nothing. But besides the things we just talked about, they would talk about the original statements by friends and family. So remember the statement by Becky's cousin Daniela where she said that she talked to Becky the night before and Robert had come into Denny's where she worked and harassed her. The defense lawyer said there was absolutely nothing or no one to back that up. They said they couldn't find anything to say that even happened that night. They would also talk about how just because a certain type of gun, like a shotgun, is similar, that doesn't prove anything that it shot these 3 people. So I also wanted to come back to the story of Javier Garcia Jr. He was the friend who told police that Becky told him that she was going on a hike on the property with Pape and Smith. He also said that he wanted to go with them, but Becky told Javier no. Now, the defense is going to kind of try and use Javier as a reasonable doubt scapegoat in this case. So the defense is trying to say that Javier wanted to be more than just friends with Becky, and they should be looking at him as a suspect. They said that his phone also pinged in the vicinity of the house, but this goes along with the story that he wanted to go hiking with them. Becky said no, so I guess he turned around and left. The police said he was already away from the scene at the time of the murders. To me, this didn't seem like too much of a story, but the defense really seemed to be playing into it. They said that Javier was getting some sort of extra treatment because his father was an investigator for the DA's office, and mom was a retired politician. Plus, the defense was saying that Javier's lawyer asked for immunity if he was to testify for the grand jury. So on the 48 Hours show about this case, the host had Javier's lawyer on, Eduardo Roy. This whole part was it was kind of uneventful with like fake suspense you would expect from a network TV show. But I just wanted to tell you what Roy said. When asked if he wanted immunity for Javier, he said, quote, "I asked them to be clear before I made him available that he was not a target or suspect for the investigation," end quote. I guess this makes sense since the defense was really trying to play him up, Javier, as a suspect. Then the host asked him why he asked for that, and his response was, quote, "Because I'm a very good lawyer, that's why," end quote. I just think this response was horrible. I mean, it's just so... the ego that came from this lawyer, "I'm a very good lawyer." It was just like, it wasn't an answer at all. It just was...
No, but I wonder how much of that is playing up for the camera.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was a show, but it was just super annoying.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched the show, and now I can't remember, maybe because of his statement, I feel like his suit was too large and very bright, like purple. But I could be totally wrong. It was just his statement was so over the top that I think his clothes were too.
I kind of wonder how often someone asks for immunity from a crime that the person didn't commit like this instead of, I know people will ask for immunity from before they testify for crimes they did commit. So, the prosecutor will kind of overlook those because they want to get someone for murder, not for, like you said, selling drugs or gun stuff or whatever. But this is just, I don't know. I've never really heard of that. He does that for all his clients? Or?
Right. Yeah, I'm just not sure either.
Well, I wonder if it's one of those things too, where as a lawyer, I want to function in a moral vacuum. I am your lawyer. I'm representing you. I'm going to choose to believe you're innocent, but I don't want to actually directly ask you. So maybe maybe this guy does something like that where it's preemptive. Whether you did it or not, I'm just going to say we're going to go for that because once we have that in writing, then it's a contract, right? And they can't go back on it.
Yeah, it is weird.
And for the defense, it's them painting an alternate narrative. They're going to spin it that they had nothing to do with it. Look at any other possible reason. You get the right kind of people on the jury. Not that hard to believe if you have a particular bent that, oh, this kid who's dad's a investigator, mom's a retired politician. Well, there is something funny going on.
Like what you said earlier, like pleading the fifth or asking for immunity.
Right.
It's already, the defense can already tell the jury, look what he did.
You're right.
This is reasonable doubt right here. He's not saying everything.
I mean, it's we live in a time when true crime is constantly on TV. The ID channel. It's all over. I mean, you're listening to a podcast right now of it, and then so having somebody say that, then that gets me in the framework. Well, maybe they're right.
Right.
And all we need is reasonable doubt.
Although I don't think they can just throw anybody in the middle of a trial and say they could have done it. I think you have to run that by a judge and have pretty good evidence that that's a possibility before you can just drag someone through the mud like that.
Well, you cannot use his name, but you can still, the defense could make up a story, right?
Yeah, that fits the evidence.
Right.
Perhaps, yeah.
But with all this, everything took a really weird turn on October 3rd, 2015. The prosecution said that they will not be going forward with a trial and to let both Pape and Smith free. What the prosecution said in a statement was, quote, "Upon a closer review of the grand jury proceedings, the district attorney's office has determined that legal issues arose during the proceedings against defendant Pape that make it appropriate to dismiss the case at this time," end quote. Later in the statement, it says, quote, "The district attorney's office has concluded that it would not be appropriate to continue the criminal proceedings solely against defendant Smith, so the charges against both men have been dismissed," end quote. So they never go into any details of why, what mishaps ensued during this thing that they had to dismiss it.
But you would think that if their case was strong against both of them equally, that you would still go after Smith. I don't know. I don't know enough about the criminal.
But it might not be enough. I mean, that might have been motive.
Right.
And yeah, I'm not sure. Well, end of story, right? Nope. In June of 2016, the two were arrested again on the murder charges with updated evidence. According to the new warrant, it states that the evidence included retesting of DNA to refined results, jail calls where firearms were discussed, forensic cell tower analysis, and identification of anonymous callers who now described as a key witness. I will come back to this, but I would like to start at the beginning of the trial. And I also need to thank Jessica for her amazing research that she did on the trial. She's put together a 17-page timeline outline that you can find on our show notes of the episode on CaliforniaTrueCrime.com. This whole trial is pretty crazy, and she did a great job putting it together. So there's still a lot on this, so I think we are going to wrap it up here. We'll get into all the new evidence and the trial when we meet up next week.
So we'd like to highlight a cold case from the area. This week we're going to highlight a cold case from Cathedral City in California, and this comes directly from their website. On Tuesday, November 2nd, 2010, at approximately 6:24 p.m., a vehicle stopped in the 67100 block of Asistencia. Yanis Mora and Moises Sanudo were introducing their infant son to friends when a vehicle approached and stopped next to them. The driver of the vehicle asked, quote, "Where are you from?" before several gunshots were fired from the vehicle and into the crowd. 6 people were shot by the occupants of the vehicle. Agustin Garcia, age 20, was pronounced deceased at the hospital. Yanis Mora, 16, died at the scene. Daniel Ayala, age 37, was treated for multiple gunshot wounds to his extremities. Araceli Sanudo, age 14, was treated for a gunshot wound. Moises Sanudo, age 17, was treated for multiple gunshot wounds. Yanis and Moises' 3-month-old infant son was also treated for a single gunshot wound. The vehicle was described as a light-colored Chrysler PT Cruiser or Chevrolet HHR. The driver was described as a Hispanic male in his early 20s. The public is encouraged to call the Cathedral City Police Department with any further information regarding this case at 760-770-0300 or by email at tips@cathedralcity.gov. And we'll, as always, put these all up on our social media so that you can get access to everything right away.
Thank you for joining us tonight on this episode of California True Crime. Don't forget to check us out on social media at Cali True Crime on Twitter and Instagram, at California True Crime on Facebook, and CaliforniaTrueCrime.com. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can drop us a line at CaliTrueCrime@gmail.com. We'd like to thank Melanie Duncan, our quality control engineer, and as always, this episode is recorded and produced at Chateau Walnut.